A volcano cannot be scheduled. Ask almost anyone, and that's the rule they'll hand you. Mountains blow when they blow, and the smartest thing a person can do is get out of the way. So here's a fact that quietly breaks that rule in half. On the big island of Hawaii, a scientist has been writing down dates for when a volcano will erupt, real dates, days in advance, and the volcano keeps showing up for them, 51 times so far, and there's a 50-second date circled on the calendar for this week. The volcano is Kīlauea, sitting on the southeastern shoulder of Hawaii's Big Island, and for the last year and a half it has been doing something that runs against nearly everything the public believes about how volcanoes work. It has been erupting on a rhythm, a beat you could almost tap your foot to if the tempo weren't measured in days. Swell, then fountain, rest, then fountain again. Over and over, more than 50 times. Like a metronome, the island built for itself out of molten rock, one that ticks not in seconds but in weeks, and one that the United States Geological Survey has learned to read well enough to tell you, in advance, roughly when the next tick is coming. That's the strange thing we're going to walk through today, slowly and carefully, because a volcano you can put on a calendar sounds like nothing but good news, and in one real way, it is. But the deeper you go into why this one is so obedient right now, the more you start to notice the quiet catch sitting underneath it, the exact reason the scientists who forecast these eruptions are careful never, ever to promise you the rhythm will hold. If you like Earth stories told with the actual monitoring data instead of a flashing red banner and a fake countdown clock, subscribe now, because this channel takes you through what the instruments genuinely show, and this is one of the most quietly astonishing things they've shown us in years. Let's start with the rhythm itself, because it's far more precise than you'd ever guess. Kīlauea kicked off this particular performance on the 23rd of December, 2024. And it isn't erupting the way most people picture an eruption, one long, unbroken river of fire glowing for months on end. Instead, it comes in episodes. An episode is a burst of lava fountaining out of vents inside a summit crater called Halemaumau, and each burst lasts only a matter of hours before it shuts off, sometimes as suddenly as flipping a light switch. Then the volcano falls silent. It pauses. Days go by, sometimes more than 2 full weeks, and then, without fail so far, it does the whole thing over again. As of this week, the tally stands at 51 completed episodes. Episode 52 is the one they've penciled in for right now. Here's why the timing actually works, and it's honestly a beautiful piece of natural clockwork. Beneath the summit sits a shallow reservoir of magma. In between the episodes, fresh magma rises up from deeper inside the earth and slowly refills that reservoir. As it fills, the entire ground surface above it swells. It bulges upward and tilts outward, the way the head of a drum lifts if you pushed a fist up against it from below. Instruments planted at the summit measure that swelling continuously, minute by minute, all day and all night. Then, once the reservoir has filled back up to roughly the same pressure point it reached before the previous episode, the volcano fountains blows that pressure back out and the swollen ground sinks down again. Fill to the line, release. Fill to the line, release. And here's the elegant part. Since the 5th episode, the amount the ground swells and the amount it drops back down have stayed almost perfectly balanced. Each fountain erupts about as much lava as the volcano quietly stored up during the pause that came before it. That balance is the entire secret behind the forecasts. Think about what it means. If you know the pressure line the volcano needs to reach before it goes, and you can measure exactly how fast it's currently climbing toward that line, then you can do straightforward arithmetic and estimate when it'll arrive. That is precisely what the observatory does. Once enough swelling is built up during a pause to give them a clean, reliable read on the rate, they publish a forecast window, a range of a few days, when the next fountain is most likely to begin. They've been doing it since episode 5, and the volcano keeps turning up inside the window they drew. Let me give you one example that shows just how sharp this got. Back in late February of 2025, the observatory announced that the next episode should begin somewhere between the 4th and the 6th of March. It began on the 4th of March. Read that again and let the oddness of it land. That is a government scientist calling a volcanic eruption to within a couple of days and nailing it for a natural hazard that almost everywhere else on the planet is considered close to impossible to time at all. Timing eruptions is supposed to be the thing volcanology simply cannot do. On this one volcano, right now, they're doing it on repeat. The person most responsible for that method is a research geophysicist at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory named Ingrid Johansson, and she's been refreshingly plain about how strange the situation is. In her own description, the rule of thumb is almost embarrassingly simple. The swelling just has to climb back up to about the level it was sitting at right before the last episode, and then the volcano goes. But she's equally careful to say out loud the thing that tends to get lost in all the excitement, that this level of regularity is genuinely rare. Other episodic fountaining eruptions at this very same volcano in decades gone by were never anything close to this clockwork. This is not how Kīlauea normally behaves. It's how Kīlauea happens to be behaving now. Hold on to that little word now because it's carrying an enormous amount of weight, and we'll circle back to it before we're done. First, though, I want you to actually stand inside one of these episodes because the raw numbers are staggering and they're far too easy to skim past. Let's take the most recent one, episode 51. Which the observatory reconstructed almost minute by minute. It began at around 8:30 in the morning, Hawaii time, on the 15th of July. For the first couple of hours, the fountaining steadily built, higher and higher, and then, near 10:30 that morning, it hit its peak. Lava was blasting out of the north vent to a height of roughly 950 feet. Picture that honestly for a moment, a jet of molten rock, standing about as tall as a 90-story skyscraper, except this skyscraper is made entirely of fire and it's roaring straight up out of a hole in the ground. Above it, a plume of ash and volcanic gas climbed to somewhere around 18,000 feet, more than 3 miles straight up into the sky, the cruising height of a small passenger plane, and then at 46 minutes past 4 that same afternoon, it simply stopped. The entire thing had lasted a little over 8 hours, a full working day of fire, and it ended abruptly, the final few minutes trailing off into nothing but jets of gas. In that single workday, the volcano poured out roughly 6.5 million cubic yards of lava. To make that number mean something, that's enough molten rock to bury something like 1,000 football fields under a full yard of stone. And at the peak of the outpouring, it was moving so ferociously that second by second, it was producing enough lava to fill a backyard swimming pool 3 or 4 times over every single tick of the clock. Not per minute, per second. Now here's a detail that catches most people off guard. Episode 51 was actually one of the smaller recent ones. Earlier in this eruption, the fountains were even more violent than that. In one episode last year, the lava reached about 1,500 feet in the air, taller than the Empire State Building, antenna and all. Some episodes threw out well over twice the volume of episode 51. And through all of it, episode after episode, the observatory kept publishing its windows and the volcano kept honoring them so reliably that people living downwind started using the forecasts the way you'd use a weather report. Knowing a window is open lets a family in the fallout zone close up the house, cover the water catchment tank, and keep the grandkids indoors for an afternoon. A volcano became something you could, in a limited but very real sense, plan your week around. So let's ask the fair question, the one a sharp viewer has probably already started forming. If we can predict this thing so precisely, doesn't that mean we understand it? Doesn't it mean the volcano is tamed, controlled, basically safe? And this is exactly where the story turns, because the honest answer is no, and the reasons why are the most important part of everything we're covering today. Being able to forecast when a fountain will start is not the same as understanding the volcano, and it is nowhere near the same as controlling it. The forecast works because of a pattern that's steady fill to the line, release rhythm. but the volcano is under no obligation whatsoever to keep the pattern. And in fact, it's already been wobbling. Several times during this eruption, the ground has started to deflate to sag and lose pressure right in the middle of a pause for reasons that still aren't fully pinned down. A little unexpected slump that eats into the pressure that was building up and shoves the whole timeline backward. When that happens, the observatory has to move the window, and notice, that's not a failure of the science. That's the science being honest with you. The metronome's tempo drifts, and the forecasters can only tell you when the next beat is coming after they've measured how fast the volcano is ticking right now. They are reading the rhythm. They are not writing it. Nobody wound this thing up, and nobody on Earth can slow it down. Which brings us to the deeper strangeness, the thing that makes this so much more than a fun fact about a well-mannered mountain. Because this is the exact same volcano, the same magma system, that not very long ago was one of the most destructive natural events in modern American history. And when it did that, it gave nothing like a clean, calendar-ready warning. Rewind to the 3rd of May, 2018. That spring, Kīlauea's magma did not stay politely up at the summit. It drained sideways and downhill, underground, into a populated stretch of the island's East Rift Zone, into neighborhoods, into a subdivision called Leilani Estates, where people lived in ordinary houses with ordinary yards and ordinary mornings, and the ground there began to crack open. Over the following weeks, 24 separate fissures split the earth along a line more than 4 miles long, and lava fountains straight up out of streets and gardens and driveways. One of those cracks, the one scientists simply numbered 8, grew into a monster feeding a channelized river of molten rock that ran all the way to the sea and consumed everything standing in its path. By the time it finally ended that summer, that eruption had destroyed more than 700 structures. It buried close to 14 square miles of land, an area the size of a small city under fresh rock, some of it more than 200 feet deep and still cooling years afterward. It drove around 2,000 people out of their homes for good. It came alongside a magnitude 6.9 earthquake, the strongest to strike the island in more than 40 years. And up at the summit, as all that magma drained away to feed the destruction below, the crater floor itself collapsed downward by more than 1,600 feet in places, as if the ground gave way by the height of a small mountain. It was the largest eruption of its type on that rift zone in at least 2 centuries. And here's the mercy folded inside the catastrophe. No one was killed, in large part because the lava, for all its overwhelming power, moved slowly enough that people had time to get out. Now sit with the contrast, because it's the whole heart of this. The same volcano. One version keeps a schedule so faithful you can circle it on a calendar and cover your rain tank in time for the ash. The other version cracks open a neighborhood with a kind of warning that no tidy forecast window could ever turn into a safe, precise date. What changed between those two faces was not the volcano's honesty. What changed was where the magma decided to go and how it chose to come out. So the word predictable needs a very careful hand. What's predictable right now is one specific behavior summit fountaining, inside a national park, in a crater with no homes anywhere near it during one specific chapter of this volcano's long life. That predictability is real, and it's a genuine scientific triumph, and I don't want to shrink it for a second. When I first read how tightly they'd been calling these windows, over and over, it honestly stopped me cold, because this is the thing that's supposed to be impossible. But predictable is not a synonym for safe, and it is not a synonym for permanent. This is not Honolulu under threat. This is not a supervolcano stirring awake, no matter what some breathless thumbnail somewhere out there is trying to sell you. And it is absolutely not a promise that the next chapter of this volcano will be as gentle or as easy to read as this one has been. If the split personality of this mountain grabs you the way it grabs me, drop a comment and tell me which face unsettled you more, the one that keeps perfect time or the one that swallowed a neighborhood. The comments people leave on these Kīlauea videos are some of the sharpest on the whole channel, and I read them. Because here's the quiet catch we set aside a few minutes ago, the thing hiding underneath all that lovely regularity. A metronome ticks along steadily, faithfully, dependably, right up until the moment it stops. And when this episodic rhythm finally ends, and someday it certainly will, no one gets to know in advance which episode was the last one, or what the volcano chooses to do next. It might simply go quiet for a stretch of months or years. It might shift out of these clean, separate bursts and into a slow, continuous eruption instead. Or the magma might, once again, decide to travel to leave the summit stage entirely and head off somewhere that has streets and house numbers. The very regularity that makes these forecasts possible is precisely what turns the eventual break in that rhythm into the single most important thing to watch for. The scientists aren't uneasy because the volcano is misbehaving. They stay alert precisely because it's behaving so faithfully that any genuine change in the beat would be a signal worth taking very seriously. And thankfully, they do have several ways to catch a change early, which should be reassuring. The observatory doesn't lean on a single instrument or a single idea. Alongside the tilt measurements that track the swelling and sinking ground, they watch the seismic signals, the underground tremor that comes alive whenever fluid is on the move through the rock, and they've built a second forecasting model on top of that. When the tilt model and the seismic model both point at the same window, the forecasters gain confidence. When the two disagree, that disagreement is itself a piece of information worth chewing on. There's also a telltale precursor they've learned to recognize with real reliability. A rhythmic rise and fall of the lava inside the vent in the hours before a full fountain, driven by gas bubbles building up beneath a cooler crust and then bursting through it. It's a lot like watching a covered pot slowly come up to a boil. When that starts, the observatory knows the next act is close at hand, and that's often the moment they raise the alert level and change the aviation color code, warning pilots and downwind residents that the fireworks are near. Put all of that together and you get a genuinely modern picture of how human beings and a volcano can share an island, not conquering it, not predicting it in some all-knowing, godlike way that scrubs away every risk. Just listening carefully, patiently, continuously, with a whole network of instruments closely enough to hand people a few days of warning and a fair, honest sense of what's most likely, while staying completely upfront about everything that still can't be known. And I'd argue that's not a weaker story than the doomsday version you'll find plastered across the internet. To me, it's a far better one, because it happens to be true, and because it actually helps a real family make a real decision on a real afternoon. So, what does any of this mean for you? Watching from the mainland, most likely nowhere near an active lava vent. A few things, and they're genuinely worth carrying with you. First, this is the clearest working example anywhere on the planet, right now, of eruption forecasting that actually functions, and the lessons being wrung out of this one cooperative Hawaiian volcano feed directly into how scientists will someday try to read far more dangerous ones from the quiet, sleeping peaks of the Pacific Northwest to the volcanoes that sit uncomfortably close to major cities all around the world. Second, if you've ever half believed the old idea that a mountain going off with no warning at all is simply how it always works, Kīlauea is the living counterexample standing right in front of us. The warning is very often written into the ground itself, in swelling and tremor and gas, for anyone with the instruments and the patience to read it. And third, the honest lesson threaded through all of it. Predictability is a gift, but it's a loan, not a guarantee. The single moment to pay the closest possible attention to any well-behaved natural system is the exact moment its behavior begins to change. Which is why the entry sitting on the calendar for this week matters so much, and why it's the right place to leave you standing. As of the latest update, the observatory has episode 52 sitting inside a forecast window that opens between the 25th and the 29th of July, with the 25th through the 27th flagged as the most likely days for the fountains to begin. And this particular window is running a little more reliable than usual because the swelling since the last episode ended has been unusually smooth and steady. None of those deflation stumbles that have pushed past forecasts around. The metronome, in other words, has been ticking clean, so keep your eye on it. When episode 52 lights up that crater, and it very likely will, close to the window they've drawn, you'll be watching it with the whole story living in your head, instead of just a wall of fire on a screen. Subscribe and switch on the bell, because the moment that fountain climbs and the observatory posts the readings, we'll break down exactly what episode 52 told us, whether the rhythm held one more time or whether, on this go-round, the volcano finally did something new. The line is climbing back toward the mark even now. The next tick is already on its way.